When I think back of some of my favorite hunts, or just some epic hunts that stand out to me, one of my favorite hunts happens to be a late season mule deer hunt where I decided to take my recurve bow out and try to take a good buck. And this was back in 2013 or 2012. This is 2012, so 13 years ago. It doesn't seem like that long ago, but man, time flies. And I just remember it being a pretty epic season. But I also just remember the struggle of trying to self-film. So this was from a season 5 solo hunter episode. And my goal this season was to self-film a big mule deer with a traditional bow. I think it was like going into this hunt, I think people don't maybe understand how difficult it is to self-film. And so I'd always get, oh, you can or can't do this. And I think it was just one of those things somebody said, I bet you can't self-film a traditional bow hunt for a mule deer. And I took the challenge. I actually haven't watched this in a long time. So it's funny because you know, I might film something and I remember what I filmed or remember the hunt, but I probably haven't watched this video in at least 10 years. Well, yeah, probably since the last time I watched it was like in the edit bay, and that's probably the last time I watched this. So.
That early morning wind just died down, so I'll start making my way with the sun at my back. That way, if there is something, you know, it's harder for them to see me, especially with the smoke. It's hard looking into the sun this time of day. So I'm just gonna work these, stay high looking down into the canyons, get up on the next ridge and glass all these little fingers and pockets in here, because this is big buck country. They're in here. Just gotta find them and be smart about it. The last thing you want to do is spook them, because once they go, they can go a long ways, and you aren't gonna get a chance. Not overall super promising looking up here, just because I mean it's just dry dirt, man. If nothing else, it's fun to have that memory of the last time we hunted in here and shot a flipping monster. Yeah, still have a smile on my face from that one. Right now I'm looking at where I shot a monster buck 4 years ago. Just looking right across, just replaying old memories in my head. But it's fun to just reminisce sometimes.
On this particular hunt, I actually had a tag in an area that I'd hunted before, and I guess it was 4 years earlier, I shot an absolute giant buck. Well, actually I got the buck right here. I shot this deer, and so, you know, you're in the area and you're remembering this 217-inch buck. It's got a 203 typical frame. Just an absolute giant deer. So of course, I go back to hunt the spot where I took a giant deer. That's the first thing that I'm gonna do when I go into an area that I have a tag for and can look for a buck. So the one thing about this hunt is I started out with a compound bow because I was looking for a buck to best that buck. And I do remember that particular year, the season was a little bit early, so it was beginning of September. Some of the deer still had velvet on, and I'd done some scouting, so I go into the area hoping to turn up a good buck. Unfortunately, that year was kind of a drought. It was super dry. There was a lot of fires going on. Glassing was tough, and I just could not turn up that giant type buck. So I ended up hunting the archery season. On my days off, I do a lot of guiding, so it was like weekdays I was always guiding, and I have a day here, a day there, so I had multiple weekends through essentially a 5-week archery season, 5-week rifle season. So I had, 10 weeks of weekends to go out and hunt, and maybe a couple days here or there, depending on the schedule. So my plan was to try to find a giant mule deer and take it with my bow. I was looking for a good buck, and then in that season, I ended up finding a really solid, nice, typical buck, one that I would have been happy taking. I ended up sneaking in, but it's just real open country and just couldn't get close enough for a shot.
Cell phone in pocket. There's a good buck. He's 70 yards away. I closed the distance on that buck, but I had him about 50 yards and had him in the camera, but he just never presented a shot. He kind of moved off, and I think he must have heard me because I wasn't super spooked, but I don't want to push him.
The same thing though is like self-filming. You got to set up the camera. It takes a lot of work to get into position, to sneak in with a camera, with a bow, not be seen. Open country makes it even more difficult. I moved in, the buck moved off without a shot, and then I think it ended up spooking off, and I just never turned that buck back up again. So I knew what was available in the area. I knew that there was a good typical buck there, and I knew that I had time. So I just took the opportunities of finding other deer. Maybe it was something that I wasn't going to hunt to or wanting to take, to practice getting into position, getting the camera set up, because I think people don't realize how difficult it is to self-film a bow hunt. I mean, I think people understand, but it is so hard because you've got a tripod, a camera, both hands are holding something. You've got a bow and a camera. So I practiced different ways of setting the camera up, crawling forward, or bringing the camera with me on the stalk. I did a lot of different stuff to see what would work. So if I got another opportunity at that big buck or a good buck that I wanted to take, I'd done it 100 times before. And I think all that practice really paid off. A couple of the things that I remember, well, one of them, I think I just like to do things that people say are impossible. And I remember, maybe it was a comment on a video or something at the time where, I'm self-filming and bow hunting, and somebody made some stupid comment like, oh, well, you should try traditional hunting, or I bet you can't do that. And that just stuck in my head, and I just needed to prove people wrong, or at least for myself, prove that I could do something. That was one thing that I do remember. The other thing is, I'd been hunting throughout the archery season. I mean, I'd been guiding, and I saw one deer that I thought, oh, I would take this buck, but that was it, and then he disappeared. I lost that deer. So I kind of actually also, a little bit of behind the scenes, went into the season thinking, I'm not really sure that there's a buck of the caliber that I really was looking for, but I also thought, well, it might be a good opportunity to take my traditional bow out, do some filming, and I think, I could increase my success a little bit by lowering my standards. By taking that recurve out, I knew that the challenge would be so much greater that, a buck that maybe I would pass up with my compound bow or rifle, I would definitely be excited to get in close and take with the recurve. So that kind of went into it. Now it did shift from archery season to general rifle season. So I was out there with people that were hunting with rifles, but in my mind I was going to stick to the recurve, and I think like there's no hunt that I've done where things are more stacked against me. It's a traditional bow, it's rifle season, and I'm self-filming. Like all those things now working against me. So this is one thing that really wasn't mentioned in the video, was the rut turned on and I refound that big typical buck. So now I know that he's there. I found him in kind of the same general area, but the rut started to kick off, and the deer that I got on during archery season, I was able to relocate him. So I've got my recurve, I found the big buck again, it's game on.
Archery season's over and it's general rifle season. I've traded in my camouflage for an orange vest and decided to go, instead of the compound bow, pick up my recurve. Those two things are working against me, but what's working for me is it is starting into the mule deer rut. Even though it's a little bit early, the bucks are going to start moving out of the high country into some of this stuff where they stage in rut, and just as the rut goes, the deer are going to be thinking about other things than men in orange vests sometimes. There's some fresh snow, and I got a fresh set of lion tracks here. Number one food source of these lions is mule deer in this area. Keep my eyes peeled. I was walking up this mountain and I put my GoPro on my bow to film how high I'd come up. And I look over and there's a buck's butt. His head's behind a tree. And I think he can hear me, but he can't see me. Now he's looking behind him.
One of the things that you don't get from the videos, because it's kind of all on one timeline, but there were pieces where I got on the big buck, and then, because I just had like weekends, because I had to guide, so it would be like hunt and then go back to work and guide. So there was gaps in between the days that I was hunting. So I found the big buck, and then it's like, oh crap, tomorrow I have to go back and guide, and it'll be another 5 days before I can get back on the mountain and try to find that deer again.
He never ran off. He just went, he's about 80 yards. I just backed out because there was another buck that was bigger, and I didn't get a real good look at both sides. So I can grab my stuff and then keep working.
I relocated that big buck, and then I'm moving in, and it's one of these where they're moving and they're focused on this doe, and there's other bucks around, and I just keep following them, and as they go over the rise, I'm running to catch up. It was so hard because I've got my bow, I've got the camera, and I got onto this part where they were over the hill, and he's like 18 yards away, and I'm setting up the camera, and I didn't even get him on video then because I couldn't get the tripod high enough up. If I was just hunting, I could have just, or I mean, I was just hunting, but if I was just not filming, I could have drawn back, moved up, and shot the buck. But instead, I was like so close, I'm gonna try to wait and get the camera set up, and it didn't work out. That was real frustrating. At that point, I was probably thinking, oh man, why did I sign up for this hunting with the recurve or the trad bow? But I'd committed to it. I got something in my head and said that I could do it. And I was so close right there that I really believed that it was gonna work out.
Dropped down the mountain, I got a little bit of video of him. Man, he's a nice buck. He's gonna haunt my dreams tonight because I'm running out of time. And if I wasn't filming, or if I had my compound, I could have smoked him. I know it. It's just a little bit out of range for the recurve.
this part's hilarious because this is just, I think, one of the most iconic moments of this entire video. Is I'm sitting here self-filming myself talking about the deer. And if you look closely in the far right corner, you can see a deer come out from behind me. So I'm sitting there talking, and this deer happens to feed over the ridge. And I'm glassing and looking this other way, and a buck walks out behind me, which I didn't even know until after I, got back and was done like watching the video that deer was actually in there. And I had an old video, I think it was like the first video I ever posted on YouTube of this essentially scenario here where I stalked, we were talking about the buck and then stalked in and almost got a shot.
See me when I'm laying down because of the slope.
So one of the things, what I did, I had my camera and it was on a tripod and I had like a longer lens. So I set that up where I first saw the buck. And the thing that I had working for me was the slope of the hill was pretty steep. So anything just over the rise, like if I was sitting down, I couldn't see the deer. So I set that camera up to where that buck was feeding and then flipped the camera screen around because it's like an old handy cam style. So I flipped the screen around so I might be able to see if it was in the right zone, and decided to crawl in without the camera because I thought setting the camera up was what screwed me up the week before. And looking at this video, I think this buck was actually one of the bucks with the big buck that I got on the week before, which I didn't really notice at the time, but see it now. But anyways, I moved in and I'm crawling up on the buck and he just starts to stop and I'm in the frame, the buck's in the frame, it's all self-filmed. I have a recurve bow. This is gonna be the most epic self-filmed hunting scene or shot of all time.
Man, that was crazy. I was just sitting here glassing and I look over to my left and this buck was kind of feeding out. I just set the camera up behind me up on the ridge where he was at because I had the camera up a little higher, and there was this little dip and then I crawled up and I couldn't see him and he couldn't see me because of the slope of the hill. When I stood up I still couldn't even see his body, just the top of his back, and there's some brush in the way, and then he walked off and he got out of frame and ran. That was crazy.
So the buck's there, I see the buck, I'm down, I draw out of sight, I stand up, and as I'm standing up, the buck just naturally started to move off. But I just did not feel comfortable with the shot, and I had to let down. It was fairly heartbreaking, but he moved off and then spooked out, and that was my opportunity. But I'm glad I didn't take that shot because I just didn't feel comfortable with the setup and with the shot. However, the stalk was just perfect and I was just this close. It's one of those things though, because I didn't know what was gonna come next. So it didn't work out then, but in the long run, I'm glad it didn't work out. One of the things that I noticed with this is just like the change in gear. And I always laugh because people hated the fact that I mix and matched camouflage. That's one of the things. They did not like that. And you know what? To be 100% honest, I did it intentionally to just piss those people off. I loved doing things that people said I can't do. And it's just funny, like the peanut gallery has so many ideas or opinions. It's like, you can't, what? It would annoy people. And I'm like, good. Those people don't get me. I don't get those people. So mixing and matching patterns, originally it wasn't that intentional, and then once I figured out that there's certain people that it really annoyed, I just kept doing it. I think that's why I still use like an Android phone and everyone else has iPhones. A little bit of a contrarian. I like to just, cause a little bit of strife in people's lives, Going into the season, I've always shot traditional bows. I mean, that's how I started shooting and started bow hunting was with, no sights, instinctive shooting. That's how I taught myself from, like, I guess it was Byron Ferguson videos, where it was like I'd watch TNN Outdoors. He had this little episode and it was like, be the arrow. That was the only archery training that I got when I first started, be the arrow. And I would practice in my backyard with a tennis ball on or not a tennis ball, but a softball on a string, and I'd swing it back and forth and shoot it with my bow. That's how I learned to shoot a bow. And so when it came time for this hunt, I was like, oh, I love hunting with traditional gear, but I just hadn't done it since I started self-filming. And so one of the things that I was like, I'm gonna shoot my bow and on this hunt. Well, my arrows had been in like an arrow case, and I think it was earlier in the season in the back of my truck, and all the feather fletchings had come off the arrows. And so they were all either matted and messed up or had come off the arrows. And I don't know, it was like there wasn't much time to change anything. So I went to go find some more feather fletchings. It was like mid-season, the season's gonna start. And by the time I realized that, and I could not find feather fletchings anywhere. And so I was thinking, like, well, maybe I just don't hunt with the recurve. And I found these, they were just like, plastic veins, and it was ones that you put them on by dipping it into boiling water. So I just stripped all the feathers off, dipped those in. They're like blazer veins, and I'm like, this is not gonna work. And so I started shooting them, and it wasn't the best arrow flight, but it still worked. I felt confident that I could make a kill shot out to probably 25, 30 yards, but I was really hoping to keep it 20 yards or less. So that actually really limited me. And that's one thing, like, people that trad bow hunt a lot, they're just shaking their head. I got some friends that are like, oh yeah, of course, Remy, he just grabs some stuff and goes hunting with it. And it was one of those things. However, it was super wet, and I'd never even seen anyone hunting with traditional gear and plastic veins. I don't do it now, but on this particular hunt, it was super wet. I thought, oh, this is actually kind of beneficial, because that first day out, it was just nuking snow, and they weren't affected. The arrow flight was, it did change my arrow flight a little bit, but I'd practiced enough with it to know how to shoot and where to shoot, and I felt very confident going into it that I could make a good shot. However, I was limiting myself to shots that I felt like I could make an ethical shot. So I was planning on getting really close, and that just even added to the challenge again. But I just figured, whatever, it's already an impossible feat. I might as well do what I can and see how it goes. Man, the ads back then were so bad. Oh my gosh, if anything, the ads, oh my gosh. So on one of the parts where the buck he was kind of, there's other bucks around, there's smaller bucks, and he kept kind of pushing those bucks off and then going back to the doe. So they went over a rise, and I just caught up, and I could see the antlers of the big buck coming up the ridge. And then off to my right, the doe actually popped up, and I got down and was able to kind of move in and get into position to where I would be in range as that buck started to push that doe out. And I think that I was just hoping that the bigger buck would be the one on the doe, because I saw him over there, but I knew it was going to be that kind of similar scenario where I couldn't get the camera up, the angle wasn't right, and I probably wouldn't get a shot. But as that doe came up, I knew things could potentially change. So I had a lot of good things going for me at this point, because they moved up, and the doe, it was like the angle was the same thing. I was on the downhill side. They were sort of at the top of the ridge, or we were kind of on the same ridge because I was going up over the ridge. But as they came up, when I was down, they had trouble seeing me. I had the camera set up a little bit higher, and I saw him come out. The buck was doing his rutting thing, so he was fairly distracted, which gave me enough time to make a shot. And I remember, I'll never forget, drawing back, and I think it was one of those moments where I drew back, and when I just hit my anchor point, I felt so solid, like I know I'm gonna hit this buck. And when I released that arrow, I mean, it was just that perfect arrow flight, and watching it hit that deer, it was just so unbelievable.
I'm shaking. Oh man. Oh God. I've got blood here, so I should be able to follow him down the mountain. I don't think he's gone far. There's quite a bit of blood.
The way to describe it would be reverse buck fever. Like, I was so locked in the moment. I was so focused. I was hyper focused, having the camera and dealing with all this stuff. And then when that shot hit, it was like that reverse buck fever. I mean, I was shaking. I like could barely breathe or talk. I just remember thinking, there's no way that worked out. It's during rifle season. I'm hunting with a traditional bow, and I'm self-filming. And then to get the buck, like, it was pretty dang
Pretty much
cool.
had a yard sale. I think I left my tripod somewhere. Oh man, it's been a cluster today. But big buck down. Look at this guy. I'll figure the tripod situation out. I don't know if you can see that, but that is a beast. Look at the forks. That is a great, great, great mule deer. Holy cow, he's awesome. Big old buck, nice mass. Perfectly symmetrical. I'm stoked. Get set up here and do it justice, because it's a gorgeous buck. I'm gonna get some good pictures of him too. It's too hard to film yourself walking up to an animal. It's kind of cheesy when you set the camera up and walk up. Ooh, look at the big deer. I'm gonna do it either way.
Yeah, that's so true. It is, the challenge and experience is what you make it. I think I've always been like that. I love bow hunting. There's nothing more exciting to me than chasing an animal with a bow, but I love all forms of bow hunting, traditional bow hunting, compound bow hunting. I love hunting with a muzzleloader. I love hunting with a rifle. I love hunting upland game with a shotgun. I just love hunting. I mean, like, I'm absolutely obsessed with it. So I think the other thing that this hunt kind of taught me is I think it just really pushed me to the limits of what I might be able to do. And I don't think I'd tried that kind of hunt and filming since, but also I don't think that I could ever top that experience, and would never even think about trying. Like, that was an incredible buck. Well, actually, the buck's right here. Let's see. Look at this deer. I mean, it's just an absolute giant deer, and to take that during rifle season with a recurve, like, that's just unheard of. Like, that was just such a cool experience, such a cool memory, such a cool deer. Like, just one of the coolest hunts and hunting experiences that I've had. It was just phenomenal.